still part of the output or the motor part of the nervous system, but before we begin, let's pray first. So let's pray. Dear Father, Lord, we invite your presence once again as we start this lecture for our students. May you be with us, guide us, and bless the students especially as they're going to listen to the lecture. May they be receptive. Bless, help me also as I deliver the lecture. Thank you, Lord, for hearing us in our prayer. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So the ANS is that part of the nervous system that's autonomic nervous system. It's like automatic. Unlike the once the somatic part, you have to think about it before you do it. There's also reflexes, but the ANS, it's the one that is responsible for most visceral functions, visceral organs of the body, like the heart, the rate of the heart, how it contracts, how forceful it contracts, the GI, the motility, and the secretion. They were controlled by the ANS. Now there are two divisions of the ANS. They are what's the one responsible for the flight or fight or flight? Sympathetic. So that's sympathetic. The other one is parasympathetic. That's for rest and digest. Okay, so those are the two divisions. Now, anatomically, you have the brain and the spinal cord, which is the part of the nervous system. From the brain, nerves exit out of the brain, out through the holes in the skull. You will learn later on in your anatomy. We call them cranial nerves. Okay, and it sends these nerve fibers to different parts of the body. From the spinal cord, we also have the spinal nerves exiting out of the spinal cord. But the spinal cord is encased in the bony vertebra. How many vertebrae do you have? 31. Okay, so you have cervical, thoracic, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, 1 coccygeal. Okay, so those are the spinal nerves. How about the cranial, the vertebrae? And then you have spinal nerves exiting out of these vertebrae. From the brain, you have the cranial nerves. You have how many? 12. Okay, you have mnemonics for that. So, for the spinal nerves, when they exit out, for the nerves that serve the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, they first go into the ganglia. Ganglion is a collection of nerve cell bodies outside of the CNS, brain and spinal cord. So there could be when you read the word paravertebral, they're like parallel to that vertebra. They're very near. So there's one in the left, there's one in the right. So that's paravertebral ganglion, collection of nerve cell bodies just near the vertebra. When you say prevertebral, that's like sitting on top of the vertebra. That's ganglion. So these autonomic nerve fibers, they go out, the spinal nerves, for example, and then they go into the ganglion, where there is relay of the signal before they go into their organ. Unlike the somatic nerve fibers, they go directly to the organ. Okay, so they have to go to the ganglia first. That's one difference of the autonomic nervous system from the motor, somatic. And then they arise also from the intermediolateral horn of the spinal cord. So if you remember the spinal cord cross-section, you have the butterfly shape. So the one on top or the one in the posterior or dorsal is the motor. The one anteriorly is the sensory or ventral. Correct? Am I correct? There's a small one in the middle, in the it's the intermediolateral horn. So that's where the autonomic nervous system arises. Okay, for the motor, it's in the dorsal, anterior, and sensory. Okay, so that's another difference. And then from where it arises, it goes into the ganglion, and then there is what they call a preganglionic nerve fiber. Then there's a synapse there in the ganglion, and then a postganglionic nerve fiber before it enters into the organ, effector organ. Okay, unlike the somatic, as I've said, it's just one going into the effector organ. Okay, so now let's go to the differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So for sympathetic, it's also called thoracolumbar outflow, meaning the spinal nerves that exit, it exits out of the thoracic and lumbar vertebrae. So thoracolumbar outflow. So you have there T1 for head, for sympathetic nerve fibers going to the head to the neck, it's T2, T3, 4, 5, and 6 to the thorax, T7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to the abdomen, T12, L1, L2 for the legs. So that's thoracolumbar. For the parasympathetic, if it's thoracolumbar for sympathetic, for parasympathetic, it's craniosacral. So meaning cranial nerves and sacral spinal nerves. Okay? So for the cranial nerves, they are what cranial nerves? There's 4 cranial nerves that's involved in the parasympathetic. Cranial nerve 3, 7, 9, and 10. Which one is where is it most concentrated? The parasympathetic nerve fibers. Cranial nerve 10. That's vagus. Remember vagus? So when as clinician, as anesthesiologist and students of physiology, when you hear vagus, we almost immediately think parasympathetic effect. So when you say vagal stimulation, it's equivalent to parasympathetic effect. Okay, 75% of parasympathetic activity comes from vagus. Okay, so you have also all the organs that are innervated by, that's already discussed in your book. So that's vagus. And then for the sacral side, the craniosacral. Sacral is S2 and 3, sometimes S1 to S4. Okay, for organs like the bladder, okay, ureters, and genitalia. Okay, so that's one difference anatomically. Craniosacral for parasympathetic, thoracolumbar for sympathetic. Okay, so that's one. What else? What about anatomical difference between the nerve fibers? So as I've said, diba, from the intermediate lateral horn, it goes to the ganglion, and from the ganglion, it goes to the organ. So you have a preganglionic and then a postganglionic. For the sympathetic, their preganglionic nerve fibers are short. Their postganglionic nerve fibers are long. The opposite is true for the parasympathetic. Their postganglionic nerve fibers are short, meaning their ganglion is very near now to the effector organ, so that the nerve fibers from the ganglion to that organ is short. Okay? So that's another difference. For the sympathetic, long preganglionic, short preganglionic, long postganglionic. For the parasympathetic, long preganglionic, short postganglionic. Okay? Difference. Did anybody answer that in the exam? Good. Okay. What else? So let's go to another difference. The neurotransmitters that are involved in the parasympathetic and sympathetic. We've already discussed a little bit of the neurotransmitters, but for the autonomics, we have only 2 that are important. That's acetylcholine and norepinephrine. So when you read the term cholinergic, so it relates to acetylcholine. So when you say cholinergic nerve fiber, that's the nerve fiber that will secrete, that will release acetylcholine. Okay, acetylcholine, cholinergic. When you hear the word adrenergic, norepinephrine, because another name, alternate name for norepinephrine is adrenaline. So adrenergic, that's norepinephrine. Now let's go to the differences. There are three rules or three statements you need to remember when considering the neurotransmitters involved. Number one, all preganglionic neurons are cholinergic. All preganglionic neurons are cholinergic, meaning whether sympathetic or parasympathetic, they're their preganglionic neurons secrete acetylcholine. And you remembered how acetylcholine was secreted in the skeletal neuromuscular junction? It's basically the same way. Same lang. Okay? So they're secreted there at the ganglion. It's all cholinergic. Okay? So that's the rule for parasympathetic, sympathetic. Second statement is almost all postganglionic neurons of the peripheral nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system are cholinergic. Almost all of the neurons of the parasympathetic are cholinergic. So almost all or most of the neurons of the parasympathetic, for preganglionic, it's acetylcholine. But for postganglionic, if it's parasympathetic, it's still acetylcholine. But for postganglionic, for sympathetic, that's norepinephrine or adrenergic. Okay, so the difference now is in the postganglionic neuron. So my mnemonic for this is post-ganglionic SYM, it's adrenergic. Post-SYM, adrenergic. Post-ganglionic sympathetic, adrenergic. Post-ganglionic parasympathetic, cholinergic. So acetylcholine. Okay, did you get me so far? Wala? Okay. All preganglionic neurons secrete acetylcholine. Okay, that's the first rule. For the postganglionic neurons, if it's parasympathetic, it secretes acetylcholine. But if it's sympathetic, norepinephrine. Okay? But that's the rule there is most, not all. It's just most. But for the preganglionic, it's all. Okay? That's the general rule. Did you get that? Did you get it? Okay, good. So that's one difference, another difference of the para and the sympa. Okay, so the neurotransmitters involved. So when I say adrenergic effect, what would you think? Sympa, para? Adrenergic. Adrenergic. Sympathetic. Okay, sympathetic effect. So the flight or fight response. So when you say adrenergic. When you say cholinergic, para. Okay? Sige. Now, sige. Sir, padayon lang binibigay. AVG. How acetylcholine was, how is it synthesized? Remember, acetate plus, what is it? Choline. Yeah, acetyl-CoA plus choline in the presence of the enzyme choline acetyltransferase. Okay, forms acetylcholine. And how it's degraded? The acetylcholinesterase degrades it into reverse. Okay, and then reuptake. How about norepinephrine? You had this in your biochem. How is it synthesized? What's the precursor? What's the amino acid precursor? Tyrosine. Okay, tyrosine, hydroxylation to dopamine. carboxylated to dopamine, dopamine hydroxylated to norepinephrine. Okay, norepinephrine. In the adrenal medulla, which is part of the ANS also, a specialized organ in the ANS, most of the norepinephrine is converted to epinephrine, about 80%, okay, through methylation. And then for the removal of norepinephrine, it could be reuptake or diffusion or destruction by enzymes like monoamine monoamine oxidase, monoamine oxidase, and COMT, catechol-O-methyltransferase. Okay, so those are the enzymes for removal of norepinephrine. Okay, so that's for the neurotransmitters. Let's go to the receptors. Now, there are differences also with the receptors between the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So, basically the same general principle for receptors. Once a neurotransmitter attaches to the receptor, the receptor is in the membrane of the postsynaptic neuron. So, once the neurotransmitter attaches to the receptor, there is a conformational change in the receptor, causing also a change in the ion channels, for example, like sodium. So it allows more sodium to get in, causing depolarization. Same mechanism, if it's potassium efflux, causing hyperpolarization, so inhibition. And also, it can also be secondary to a second messenger, the one we always keep repeating. Same mechanism, second messenger or ion channel. Okay, there are two types of acetylcholine receptors. You can see. We have the muscarinic and nicotinic. For acetylcholine, muscarinic and nicotinic. So when you the difference there, the muscarinic is what you will find in the post-ganglionic neuron parasympathetic. That's muscarinic. For all the pre-ganglionic neurons, they secrete acetylcholine. The receptors there are nicotinic. Okay, the same for skeletal muscle is nicotinic. For what else? Sige, that's okay. Thank you, sir. So we'll just go through this fast. Okay. Sige, ikaw na, sir. Laser pointer kanina? Ay, pointer. Wala pointer. Okay, sige na. So this is just like a summary of what we have discussed so far. So parasympathetic, long, preganglionic, short, postganglionic, sympathetic, short, preganglionic fiber, and then long postganglionic. And then the neurotransmitters involved, you have acetylcholine for both, all. For parasympathetic, it's acetylcholine. For sympathetic, it's norepinephrine. And then you have the receptors involved. For preganglionic, para and sympa, it's nicotinic receptor. For parasympathetic, it's muscarinic. But for sympathetic, because it's not acetylcholine, it's norepinephrine, there are also three types of receptors. You have the two types that I have with alpha, which has subtypes alpha 1, alpha 2, and beta subtypes beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. Okay? So when you hear beta 2 adrenergic receptors, that definitely means it's adrenergic, it's sympathetic. So, sympathetic response. Okay. And another principle I want you to remember is the final effect on the effector organ depends on the receptor that the neurotransmitter attaches to. Depends on the receptor. For example, if it attaches to alpha-1, alpha receptor, it's the same, it's norepinephrine, but it attaches to alpha receptors. So these are the effects, alpha effects. Vasoconstriction, for example, if it's the blood vessels, vasoconstriction for the eyes, iris dilation, intestinal relaxation, intestinal sphincter contraction, pilomotor contraction, bladder sphincter contraction, and inhibits neurotransmitter release for alpha-2. So the most important there I want you to remember is vasoconstriction. It's used very clinically. That's an alpha-1 effect. Okay? So if it attaches to the norepinephrine attaches to beta receptors, so you have this vasodilation. It's opposite, no? It's the same. It's norepinephrine, but it attached to different receptor. So this time, if it's beta, it's vasodilation. Okay, beta 2. Another important beta function is cardiac acceleration through beta 1 receptor. Increased myocardial contraction, beta 1 is also beta 1. For the intestines, that's beta 2, uterus, beta 2. Another important one is beta 2 bronchodilation. Okay, bronchodilation, beta 2 effect. Okay, and then these are the other beta effects. Because, I forgot, norepinephrine in the maybe later in the pharmacology. So this is also another table in BRS, the things we discussed. The difference between SIMPA and paraSIMPA, the origin, length of the preganglionic, postganglionic neuron, the neurotransmitters involved in the preganglionic, neurotransmitters in the postganglionic. Okay, so that's all in your book. So review that. Now, what about we've already discussed the differences in anatomy, neurotransmitters, receptors involved. What about the functions? So the other question in the quiz, flight or flight, sympathetic, no? So whenever there is like an emergency, like a snake is right behind you, that's a sympathetic response. And we'll go through each of the effects later on. For the rest and digest, that's parasympathetic. So, like this. That's sympathetic effect, and the other one is parasympathetic. So which one's stimulated right now? Simpa for you guys. Okay. Maybe Garina, for the exam, it was sympathetic. Right now, it's rest na. Yeah. Okay, so this is in your book. Their effects, Simpa and parasympathetic. So easy, no need to memorize. Just think, what would happen if a snake is at my heel? Okay, what would happen to the eyes, for example? What would happen to the pupils? Of course, it would dilate, to allow more light in, so you can see everything, you can be sensitive to everything, okay? What else? What's important here? Sweat glands, blood vessels, most often constricted. Heart. What happens to the heart rate? Increase. You want to move. Increase force of contraction. Coronaries are, the beta effect is dilated, beta 2 constricted for alpha. The alpha 1 is vasoconstriction. What about the lungs? Okay, the bronchi related. Okay, what about the GI for sympathetic effect? No, depressed, no, decreased motility, decreased secretion, because that's the parasympathetic effect. So easy to remember the effects. Just think what would happen to you if there's an emergency. If there's a fire in Rogelio, you're being able to carry your ref out. That's so true. Okay, these are all the other effects. Okay, and there's another one. Oh, these are the effects. Sympa versus parasympathetic. There's also one in BRS. Okay, and the good thing in BRS, it has a receptor involved, because as I said, it's the final effect is the receptor. So you have the receptors involved. So you have, for sympathetic effect, you have alpha and beta. And then for the parasympathetic, you have the muscarinic receptors. Okay? Alright. What else? Let's go to this one. The adrenal medulla, as I said, is a special organ for the autonomics because it secretes. But the difference between that and the other ANS is that it doesn't have a pre and a post ganglion, just one. It was the right thing. Okay? And it secretes epinephrine, 80%, as I've said, of the norepinephrine that's formed is converted to epinephrine. Okay, so it is a specialized organ, and the effects of the neurotransmitters 5 to 10 times longer because they are removed from the blood slowly over a period of 2 to 4 minutes. Now, the difference between epinephrine and norepinephrine, epinephrine has more effect on beta receptors. Actually, epinephrine has alpha and beta effects. Norepinephrine has alpha only effects. That's why if you want beta effect, we give epinephrine. If you want alpha effect, like vasoconstriction, to increase the total peripheral resistance and therefore increase PT, we give norepinephrine. So clinically, you will see that when you have patients who are hypotensive, we give norepinephrine. That's in drip because they're very short-acting. But if you want beta effects like beta 1, that's cardiac contraction, heart rate, increased heart rate, we would give epinephrine because it has more effect on beta receptors and also alpha. And therefore, there has more effect on cardiac stimulation, increased cardiac output. So when you have a patient in the emergency room, the code, the heart is not pumping anymore, diba? We give epinephrine when you have clinical exposure. So epinephrine, if you want beta effects, cardiac contraction, or epinephrine, more alpha. Okay? And then also remember, in our discussions in cardio, I discussed with you cardio and GI. We had a little discussion on the sympathetic tone, diba? The vasoconstrictor tone. So it keeps the vessels slightly constricted. Also for the GID, you have the parasympathetic tone of the gastrointestinal tract. So this sympathetic tone is caused by basal secretion of the epinephrine or epinephrine by the adrenal medulla. Okay, at that rate. Okay, they did a test on the autonomics after removal of the ganglion. They noticed that there is what we call denervation supersensitivity of the sympathetic and parasympathetic organs after the ganglia was taken out. So normally, if this is the blood flow, 200, and you give norepinephrine, of course there will be vasoconstriction, so the blood flow would dip down. But if they remove the nerve, okay, so the blood flow increases. When they give the same norepinephrine, there's an increased sensitivity, because super sensitivity to the effect of the epinephrine, vasoconstriction. Okay, so that's what they call the denervation supersensitivity of sympathetic and parasympathetic organs. They become super sensitive if you take out that basal and nerve stimulation. Okay, and we also went through this in the different systems. Baroreceptor reflex, that's autonomic. Okay, in the cardio, you have also GI, you have a lot there, renal and sexual effects. Another difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic, sympathetic system responds by mass discharge discharge. So if the sympathetic system is stimulated, the heart pumps better, bronchus dilate, pupils dilate, okay? Mass response, mass discharge. Parasympathetic, more localized. Okay, more localized. Right? And then, okay, so these are the functions, summary of the sympathetic. Now let's go to application. This is the last objective for this topic. You'll have more of this in your pharma, but for application, we will introduce it to you at this level. Okay, so because you already know the sympathetic effect and the parasympathetic effect. So what happens if you give drugs that have similar sympathetic effects? So we have this what we call sympathomimetic drugs. So mime is mimic, so it mimics sympathetic. So all the sympathetic effects you will see if you give this drug. So epinephrine, okay, so you have epinephrine or epinephrine that's endogenous. There's also synthetic, okay, we give drugs, epinephrine or epinephrine, methoxamine, phenylephrine is alpha. So what's the alpha effect? If it's vasoconstriction, okay? So I have patients that go into hypotension after anesthesia. If I give epinephrine, you will see increased cardiac contractility, vasoconstriction, or epinephrine beta cardiac contraction. But if you give phenylephrine, for epinephrine you give tachycardia, but for phenylephrine, because it's primarily alpha, it causes vasoconstriction without the tachycardia. So for my cardiac patients, I prefer phenylephrine because it's alpha selective. We don't want tachycardia in mga CAD patients, man. Okay, it decreases myocardial oxygen demand, and the coronaries will not get their blood flow more effectively. Okay, so but we also have drugs that are beta selective, like isoproterenol and albuterol. What are the beta effects that you remember? Vasoconstriction, what else? The heart. Contractility, heart rate decrease. For the lungs, bronchodilation. So that's why we have albuterol here. We give for asthmatic patients, bronchodilation. Because of its beta-2 effect. Okay? So another class of drugs, if you have sympathomimetic, which act directly, we also have indirect drugs. So they indirectly cause sympathomimetic results because of release of norepinephrine from the nerve endings. So we have here ephedrine, theramine, amphetamine, which is, you know amphetamine? You know what amphetamine? That's really intense. Okay. Drugs that, then if you have these drugs, in pharma we call drugs that produce the desired effect as agonists. We call drugs that block the effect as antagonists, okay, or the ultramida. Okay, so we have drugs that block also the sympathetic effect. So what do we expect in these drugs? What will be the effect? Opposite of sympathetic, which is parasympathetic. Okay, so we have these drugs that block adrenergic effect. Drugs that block the synthesis and storage of the neurotransmitters, we have reserpine, block the release, guanethidine. Drugs that block both alpha-1, alpha-2, we have phenoxybenzone and phentolamine. For alpha-1, you have trazocine. Euhimbine for alpha-2 only. Then we have non-selective beta blockers, propranolol. So what is the effect if beta receptors are blocked? What the cardiac effect? Decreased heart rate, decreased contractility. So we use this for high blood, hypertension, and also for thyroid dysfunction. So decreased heart rate, propranolol. We also have selective beta blockers like atenolol, nebivolol, and metoprolol. They're selective beta 1. So what's the effect for beta 1? Cardiac. Okay? Decreased heart rate, decreased contractility. No beta 2. What's beta 2? Effect? Bronchoconstriction if it's antagonized, no? Bronchodilation man if it's the one. If it's antagonized, bronchoconstriction. So, if I have a patient who is hypertensive but asthmatic, which do you think of these drugs should I give? I want to lower the BP without affecting bronchodilation, leading to bronchoconstriction. Which one? Beta non-selective or beta 2 selective? Beta 1 selective? Beta 1. Now you want to give beta 1 because its effect is on beta 1 receptors only. So heart rate decreases, contractility decreases, but no bronchoconstriction. So these are all contraindicated for, the non-selective is contraindicated for asthmatic patients. They can lead to bronchoconstriction. Okay, so that's the beauty if you know the receptors, their effects. So you can learn to use the drugs, which drug is for this patient, which is applicable. Okay? So that's the difference. Then, that's for sympathetic, no? And then we have drugs that act on the parasympathetic. So we have also parasympathomimetic. So the effects are the same as the parasympathetic. Okay, so tilacarpine, methamphetamine. And we have drugs that have a parasympathetic, it's not direct, it potentiates the parasympathetic effect, the anticholinesterase drugs. You met this in your SGD? In myasthenia? Yes. So anticholinesterase, so they inhibit the enzyme that that degrades the acetylcholine into acetate and choline. Okay, so making the acetylcholine more available. So it potentiates the parasympathetic effect. Okay, so I use this also in my patients after surgery because you know acetylcholine is also in skeletal muscle junction for muscle contraction. At the end of surgery, during surgery, you paralyze the patient by giving drugs. But at the end, you want the patient to be able to use their muscles. So we give these drugs. Okay? Potentiates acetylcholine effect. Okay? Then drugs that block cholinergic activity at effector organs, we have effector organs, so anti-muscarinic. So muscarinic, muscarinic receptors. You have atropine, homotropin, scopolamine. Okay? So those are the drugs in the parasympathetic. So these are effects, this is an mnemonic which I remember used for the parasympathetic effect of some organophosphates. So salivation, okay, parasympathetic manifests. Okay, diarrhea, urination. So these are all parasympathetic effects. And then lastly, drugs that have an effect on both the sympa and para. Okay, so they could be stimulant. So for nicotinic receptors, you have nicotinic and muscarinic methacolate, muscarinic for pilocarpine. And then drugs that act on the ganglion. Okay, so we have these drugs, but these are not clinically used anymore because they're hard to control because they're both sympa and parasympathetic. So we would rather use the specific for the sympa, specific for parasympathetic. Okay, so we also have that in your PRS review. I like the one in PRS because it is like a table. It's easier to get the whole picture back. Okay, so that's for the ANS. Do you have any questions? This is a very important topic because in the board exams, a lot of the questions in the nervous system is ANS. Yeah, a lot of questions because it's clinically useful. In your clinical years, you will review this. In your pharma, you will review this. In your clinical IM, you will review this again. Okay, so you should have a good background of this, good mastery. So not so much with us, the ones we discussed in the motor or somatic. General lang to siya in the board exams, the sensory a little bit, but more of this here, ANS. So I really wanted to discuss this with you. Okay, leave the topic. It's very easy to Let's go to the next CSF, no? Brain, cerebral blood flow and CSF. So just go through this fast. This is short. So basically, for cerebral blood flow, it follows the same dictum when we discuss in cardio, blood flow. Same principles. Sige, let's see. This is you will learn later on the circle of Willis in your mirror anatomy, the blood supply of the brain from the two vertebral arteries and thoracocarotid arteries. They form a circle, okay, and then it supplies to the rest of the brain. And here in the right side, from those arteries going in, it forms into PL arteries. It goes into the pia mater and through the vertebral space, which is an extension of the CSF, and it becomes the penetrating arteriole into the brain substance itself. But what's special about these arteries is that they are covered with food processes from any supporting cells of the nervous system. Diba, in the nervous system, the functional unit is the neurons, no? Which send signals. But we have also other cells, non-neuronal cells, which support, like these glial cells, astrocytes, which are like stars. You have this in histo? Yes, okay. So they function to protect, provide nutrients, okay? And then finally, the capillaries where there is actual exchange. So this is the summary of cerebral blood flow. Every minute, there's around 50 to 65 ml blood flow per 100 gram of brain tissue. So for the entire brain, that's 750 to 900 ml. Or that's 15% of resting cardiac output. Considering the size of the brain is small, but it receives 15% of the total cardiac output. Diba? We discussed this in cardio. So it's a vital organ. It's an important organ. If maybe you're not using your brain, it will be seamless. But for you, I know, you're using your brains, it's receiving 14 or 15% of the cardiac output. And it's regulated the same with the other vascular system by carbon dioxide. So what would we expect if there's increased CO2? What would we expect on the cerebral blood flow? Increased CO2. Increased carbon dioxide. So, nakalimot na sila sa ilang blood vessels. Microcirculation. Would there be increased cerebral blood flow or decreased blood flow? Decreased. Yun, nakalimot na yun sila. It will come out in the exam. So, I give that up to you. Hydrogen. What will happen if there's increased hydrogen? Lactic acid. You're using your brain. These are waste substances. So, it would increase blood flow. Okay. Oxygen, if there's decreased oxygen, it would also increase blood flow to provide more oxygen. Okay. Substances from astrocytes like nitric oxide, metabolites of arachidonic acid, potassium adenosine. Adenosine, which we know is a vasodilator, in the vasculature. Nitric oxide also vasodilator. So this would increase cerebral blood flow. These are the factors that increase cerebral blood flow. And like the rest of the vascular system, it's also auto-regulated. Some says like 60 with 140 to 150, for hypertensive up to 180. Meaning, if pressure in that area would reach up to 180, it would adjust the constriction or dilation to maintain blood flow. Okay, that's auto-regulation in the brain. Another special characteristic of the vasculature in the brain is what we call the blood-brain barrier. So this is the normal blood vessel, but for the blood-brain, the blood vessels in the brain, we have as you said, glial cells that surround these blood vessels. This forms a barrier between the cerebral capillary blood and the CSF, because CSF fills the ventricles and the subarachnoid space. So it consists of the endothelial cells and the choroid plexus epithelium. So the functions of the blood-brain barrier is to maintain a constant environment for neurons in the CNS and protect the brain from toxins and prevent escape of neurotransmitters, because neurotransmitters are very important. They have to be preserved. You would need a lot of ATP to produce a lot of neurotransmitters. So there, and then another one is prevents penetration of some drugs to the CNS, the blood-brain barrier. Brain is very important. It's enclosed in a skull for protection, with the CSF as cushion. Then it has blood-brain barrier to prevent entry of toxins, drugs. Okay? What happens if blood vessels in the brain are blocked? The same with the heart. They could be hemorrhage or there could be ischemia, like this. So atherosclerotic plaque formation in the blood vessels of the brain can obstruct flow, leading to ischemia, leading to stroke. Another type of stroke is hemorrhage, where the vessel ruptures because of probably intense pressure or trauma, or infection. So the blood vessel ruptures. And the effect clinically on the patient depends on the area that is affected. For example, if it's the middle cerebral artery, which is most commonly affected, and it's mid-central, but it's a lot of portion. The patient would present with weakness, one-sided weakness. Okay, remember the laterality. Okay, so if it's left MCA, the effect would be right-sided weakness, and then you have loss of vocalizations, slurring of speech. Okay, depends on the site. If the stroke is in the occipital side, so what's in the occipital area? In our discussions so far, you have the vision. Okay, so if the site is on the word formation, then you will have aphasia. Okay, so it depends on the area affected. Let's go to the CSF. Okay, this is the other question. This functions to cushion the brain is around 150 ml, just small. So it's present in the ventricles of the brain here, in the cisterns, in and outside the brain, and in the subarachnoid space of the brain, and then it continues into the spinal cord. Okay, that's the CSF. So it helps to cushion the brain. But we also have injuries that traumatic injuries and resulting to coup and puncture coup injuries. So coup, if the area of damage is where the point of impact is. Puncture coup, if the damage is opposite the area of trauma. Okay, so CSF is formed at the rate of 500 ml per day. That's a lot. But there's only 150 ml. So where does the rest go? Okay? Goes to it gets absorbed. Okay? It's mainly through secretion from the choroid plexus in the four ventricles. So you will memorize this in your neuroanatomy, the flow of the CSF from its formation in the ventricles. Okay, so you will memorize that now. No need for it now. And where it flows and where it gets reabsorbed. What forms the CSF? As I said, it's the choroid plexus. Looks like a cauliflower in your microscope. It's blood vessels covered by, it's just blood that's pre-filtered, like the urine that's filtered by your nephron. It's the choroid plexus that does this, CSF. Basically, depends on active transport of sodium, sodium ions. And you have differences between the CSF and blood. I think that when you do any review, there are substances that can pass free through the blood-brain barrier and equilibrate between blood and CSF. So if you have lipid-soluble substances, they can easily go through. Other substances has to be transported by carriers. And protein and cholesterol excluded because they're large. And the CSF is maintained at a normal pressure because if it's increased pressure, that would increase pressure on the brain. You would have neurologic effects. Okay, so how do they maintain that pressure? Through if you have the choroid plexus, which they create, you have the arachnoid villi, which function like valves. So what happens? There are some clinical conditions where there is increased CSF pressure, like brain tumor, hemorrhage, infection, hydrocephalus. It leads to papilledema, which is edema of the optic disc. So we measure opening pressure of CSF by doing a Doppler tap. Yesterday I did a Doppler tap of a pediatric patient. So we just let the patient by the side and insert a needle into the interventricular space until it reaches the subarachnoid space. And from there we measure with a pressure gauge, a manometer, to measure the pressure, because some diseases have high pressures, or hydrocephalus, high increased pressures. And then we send the CSF specimen to the laboratory and they will measure it biochemical tests, a lot of biochemical tests. But then you're familiar with this, right? So what happens if there is increased secretion or if there is blockage in the reabsorption? Okay, this happens. Okay, we see some kids, because they have fontanelles. So their quad can expand. But for adults, the increased pressure in the CSF would lead to neurologic deficits faster because the skull is incompressible. Okay, that's it. Then we go to the hearing. Last, hearing and equilibrium. So very short lang CSF and cerebral blood flow. The exam more of 8 minutes. Then a little bit also of hearing. I hope you're also reading your book, Before I lecture, I read the book. For hearing, I will show you a video. Video na lang? 5-minute video. I like this video very much because it basically sums up all about hearing. It's just 5 minutes. What was the question in hearing? The sensory organ for organ of 40 that lies in the basilar membrane to cause signals to the brain on auditory transduction. And then the last question, the apparatus in the sensory organs, that's the vestibular apparatus, which detects changes in position in equilibrium. Okay, so.
The sense of hearing is accomplished by a process known as auditory transduction. The ear converts sound waves in the air into electrical impulses, which can be interpreted by the brain. As sound enters the ear, it passes through the external auditory canal, where it meets the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane then vibrates in response to the sound. Sounds of lower pitch or frequency produce a slower rate of vibration. And sounds of lower volume or amplitude produce a less dramatic vibration. Higher frequency sounds produce faster vibrations. The tympanic membrane is cone-shaped and articulates with a chain of 3 bones called the auditory ossicles. They consist of the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The movements of the tympanic membrane vibrate the oscillators, passing on the information of frequency and amplitude. The three bones pivot together on an axis shown here in red. The pivotal axis is due to a series of ligaments which hold the bones in place within the middle ear cavity. The anterior lateral ligament and the posterior inguinal ligament are of particular importance for the pivotal axis. Two structures which normally obscure this view of the middle ear have been removed. They are the chordae tympani nerve and the tendon of the tensor tympani muscle. Through the oscillators, the vibrations of the tympanic membrane are transferred to the footplate of the stapes. The stapes moves with a piston-like action, which sends vibrations into a structure called the bony labyrinth. The labyrinth is filled with a fluid called perilymph. If it were a completely closed and inflexible system, the movement of the stapes would be unable to displace the perilymph, and therefore unable to send vibrations into the bony structure. Due to the flexibility of the membrane called the round window, the stapes movement can displace the perilymph, allowing vibrations to enter the labyrinth. The corridor leading to the round window is found within the spinal portion of the bony labyrinth, known as the cochlea. Vibrations produced by the stapes are drawn into the spiral system and return to meet the round window. The portion of the spinal passage in which vibrations ascend to the apex of the cochlea is called the scala vestibular. The descending portion of the passage is called the scala tympani. A third structure, called the cochlear duct, is situated between the scala vestibular and the scala tympani. The cochlear duct is filled with a fluid called endolymph, and when viewed in cross-section, the membranes separating the two fluid-filled systems are visible. They are Reissner's membrane and the basilar membrane. The membranes are flexible and move in response to the vibrations traveling up the scala vestibular. The movements of the membranes then send vibrations back down to the scala tympani. A specialized structure called the organ of Corti is situated on the basilar membrane. As the basilar membrane vibrates, the organ of Corti is stimulated, which sends nerve impulses to the brain via the cochlear nerve. The actual nerve impulses are generated by specialized cells within the organ of Corti called hair cells. The hair cells are closely covered by a structure called the tectorial membrane. As the basilar membrane vibrates, the tiny clusters of hairs are bent against the tectorial membrane, triggering the hair cells to fire. The entire basilar membrane does not vibrate simultaneously. Instead, specific areas along the basilar membrane move variably in response to different frequencies of sound. Lower frequencies vibrate the basilar membrane closer to the apex of the cochlea, whereas higher frequencies produce vibrations closer to the base. This arrangement is known as tonotopic organization. Together, this sequence of events is responsible for our acoustic perception of the world around us.
I really like this video, okay? It basically sums up my lecture, so no more lecture. Yeah, because I don't have like nothing to say. Is it okay? We'll just go through this. It's okay. It's basically it. That's basically it, the lecture. But what's missing is the equilibrium lang. Okay, this is a very short topic at the end of. Sorry, what? In the chapter on. In the previous chapter, we discussed. So, same as just review on this. If you have a copy of this, you have a copy of my slides. Just give you a copy if you don't have. What's not mentioned is, there is no topic organization in the apex. It's responsive to low frequency or the bass sounds. For the high frequency sounds, it's in the near the modulus. So because the fibers there are short and thick near the round window, but the muscular fibers in the apex are long and thin. They respond best to low frequency. Okay. Also, hearing abnormalities, just review on this. And equilibrium. Okay, the vestibular apparatus. You have here the macula sensory area, and there are two types, the utricle and the sancule. Just go through this and how it go on the equilibrium. Same mechanism with the Golgi apparatus, where there is shearing on the tectorium membrane by the hair cells. Okay, same with equilibrium. Then you have three semicircular ducts, and what they detect. Okay, this will come on in the exam. Okay, so if you have any questions, I leave that to you to go to the details because we're not for short in time. Yeah, the exam next week will cover ANS, cerebral blood flow, and CSF and hearing. Because we have one class meeting for the special senses, we'll cover sense of vision and taste and smell. Okay, so that's the last. And then you have special topics with Dr. Pampas. I think that's the last and then special topics. Okay, so congratulations in advance. You're almost at the end. You've gone a long way, but there's still 3 more years. Okay, see you next time.